everyone. This is Manisha, and this is Teach Your Kids, a podcast about how to curate your child's education to meet their individual needs. And today I have a friend and mentor with me, Brett Kopf. He founded Remind.com, which is a communication platform that is used by 30 million active users and 80% of US teachers who send billions of messages to communicate at their schools. And most recently, he founded Omela, and Omela makes it easy for mission-driven organizations, including microschools, thus the connection, to collect and manage money in a seamless product. And Brett and I connected because of my history with microschools, and he's just become a wonderful mentor for me and knows so much about homeschool co-ops and has so much great advice for education entrepreneurs. So I thought I'd invite him on the show and have him share all his wisdom with all of you. So thanks so much for being here, Brett.
Good to be here. And you covered the perfect summary. It's nice to be here.
Oh, good. Anything I left out that you wanted to add in there?
I'm a new father.
Of course. My goodness.
Well, I guess I'm an existing father. I already had one.
Wow.
We had a new baby a month and a half ago, so that's not publicly announced.
Oh my goodness. Wow. 2-time father now. That's so exciting. Yes. Congratulations.
Thank you.
That's actually probably a good segue into one of my questions, which is I'm curious, after founding Remind with your brother as a single dude, how have things changed for you? Have your views on education been impacted by becoming a parent?
That's a good question. It's a little bit early, structurally thinking about them going into school. I have a 2-month-old and a 2.5-year-old. My wife and I have started to talk about it. One philosophical thing that I've realized, and maybe it's not philosophical, it's biological, is that in my bones, I love them, just as any parent would love them. And of course, any human being would want what's best for their children. And I happen to be in the education vertical where I spent, 10, 12 years building Remind, and we have a large majority of public schools in the United States using it. And in the last 4 years, I've been building this thing called Omela, where the large majority of our customers are microschools. I will say, though, because you asked me what's changed, one thing that has become very apparent to me is I want to be a very present dad. I want to be very life, and I also want to build a very big company. And so part of that from a parenting standpoint is making sure that when I'm with the kids, I'm really present with them in the amount of time that I can be with them and also build a big company. And that's a hard thing to do, just because the type of skill that we're having with Omela and growing, it's a hard thing to balance.
For sure. I guess I would imagine one advantage, though, is you can have more flexibility in your time in that you are your own boss and you can decide how that looks for yourself.
Yeah. And I work from home, which in the beginning, I thought I would really not like it. And COVID kind of forced us to do that. And for me, I really do like it because, I can go to run downstairs and help change a diaper or have lunch with the kids and then go to the gym when I need to go to the gym. And I really do. I do like that component a lot.
Yeah. And I think what you said about how you love your children in your bones, it's almost probably surprising in some ways that the depth and strength of that love. And sometimes when we're building a company for parents, we don't quite realize how intense and strong a force that drive is for many parents. Of course, there's so many examples of neglect and abuse in our country, but I think it does, that love does really guide a lot of parents' decisions around education. And it's important to have respect for that.
Yeah. And I think in theory, I always knew that, but before having children, but now that I have them, it's very visceral and real to me. Removing the personal side of it for a second, then when you run a company and you happen to be in education, companies that are for-profit corporations have to make money. And it's not always linear how you do that with the business model. Knowing that parents care so much about their children is a very emotional thing. We can go into this later if you want, but the way we structured our business model at Omela, and we help a bunch of microschools, is to make sure that we meet the needs of both the school leader and also the parent, because there's a few things that they each really care about. We had to speak to a huge amount of customers to understand that.
Right. Yeah, I can certainly imagine that. So you've spoken to hundreds of micro school leaders at this point, right? That's not an exaggeration. And
there's probably 300 or 400 at this point.
Wow. That's so wild. I mean, I want to hear more about this conversations, but I'm definitely curious. I mean, you're probably one of the most successful entrepreneurs that I know. You built this hugely successful company that's in so many schools. And what made you decide that you wanted to start a new company? Did you get bored? Did you just miss the early stage startup life? Was there a problem that you wanted to solve? What caused the change? And your brother along with you?
There was never a question of if I would start another one. I knew I would, just because there's no other option to do it. Now, with that said, I think I'm 36 now, and I've been doing this startup thing for, 15 years. I think at some point it would actually be interesting to maybe work at another company that's really huge and successful in some type of role, because I could probably learn a lot. But I'm loving my companies right now, and so I'm pretty in it. But when I stopped doing Remind in the day-to-day operations, I traveled for a bit because I had spent years just in the weeds on it, and I hadn't had time.
You needed a break.
Yeah. And then when I started again, we actually didn't only start with education, because we wanted to make sure that we really zoomed out and said, like, well, what do we care about and what do we want to spend our time on? And we're not with our how do we want to spend our life? And my brother and I, these are the discussions we had. And we actually started in not only education, but with healthcare. And the reason is because my dad died probably 8 years ago from Parkinson's. And it was really bad. It was as bad as you imagine. It was really bad. It was very sad. And the whole process around the logistics of death, and I know that sounds crass, but logistics meaning wills and power of attorneys, and like, how do you communicate with healthcare and like all the financial components? It was just a mess. And I was very time in handling it. And so we felt like, wow, there's a problem there. Like, there's inefficiencies. And then I just started going down that path, and I realized, like, I didn't like healthcare because it didn't operate like a true market, meaning like you go to a coffee shop and you say, I want to buy coffee for $1, and they give you that coffee and they make 20 cents and they make 20-cent margin on it, whatever it is. There's this, third party called a healthcare company, like, United Healthcare or something, that you're not actually going directly to the doctor and paying them for the value at someone else. And I just couldn't understand that market. And, the second thing is, in my heart, I really believed in the whole education thing and wanting to support that vertical. And so, we set out on this path and talked to hundreds of customers, and we bootstrapped it in the beginning just out of our own pocket. And we did raise some capital in the latter part. But now we're on a pretty good path. Like, the company's in a pretty good place.
Yeah, I mean, it's just so, I just want to acknowledge, I really feel for you in going through a trauma, like losing a parent, and then on top of that, trying to deal with all the logistics. And you are someone, and your brother, who are really good at operations and hacking systems, and for it still to be so intensely difficult is just, it's really rough. And I often kind of compare the healthcare and the education systems, and both being big, homogenous, inflexible systems. But you make me realize there actually is a lot more wiggle room in education, because we can make these choices to homeschool or go to private school, whereas with healthcare, it's more challenging.
This whole category of homeschool, private school, hybrid school, alternative school, I didn't know it existed 2.5 years ago.
Many don't, yeah.
I didn't even know it existed. I didn't know it was an option. And I was someone who was super entrenched in education. I was like, you're in public or private school. And typically, like, private, you're in like a very old, traditional, either Catholic, Christian, Jewish, Muslim school. I didn't know anything different. And then I met a Acton Academy randomly, because I was just talking to customers. And the concept of individualized, self-directed learning, where kids can lead, and teachers aren't necessarily authoritative figures, but they're trusted people who can be somewhat of a guidance system. And of course, all different flavors of homeschools and microschools and private schools, but generally a lot of them fit that. I was like, pow, mind blown. And so after talking to a bunch of them, I developed a hypothesis that they have a very tactical, clear problem. They have a hard time collecting money and information, and they pay a bunch of money in credit card fees. Very like business clear. The other thing that I believe is that the market of homeschool, hybrid, micro, like the category, it's going to grow. I think right now it accounts for roughly 3.2% of every kid in the United States being educated. I think that that's going to grow a lot. And I think back to the beginning of our conversation, a big part of it will be because parent demand. Like, there's no greater forefront than a parent wanting what's best for their children.
Yeah, and that student data is hard to track. I've seen anywhere from 5 to 6%. And in certain populations, like the Black homeschooling population, it's 16.1% of Black homeschoolers. So I think that parents are realizing they can make other choices, and now there's starting to be funding to support them as well. So it's really exciting what's happening. And we'll circle back to the future of education. But I want to, there was a particular question I wanted to have you on to answer today, and hopefully you can illuminate us. But you and I are both recipients of the Vela Education Grant, which is for radical education entrepreneurship. It's a community of 800 founders. It's pretty amazing. So I posted a poll there the other day asking, what's your biggest challenge as a microschool or education business? And 50%, I think, or maybe 60% of people said it was finding customers. And this also brought me back to another parent who had said, I really wanted to start a little homeschool co-op in my home 2 or 3 days a week, but it was just really hard for us to find other families to join. So that's kind of one side of the things. And then on the other side, sometimes I'll see, a teacher leaves their school and then all of a sudden they have this full thriving microschool because all the kids in the class sign up for the school. So I was curious, what you have seen in your conversation with 300 or 400 entrepreneurs in terms of what works for them in acquiring customers, or specifically getting people to join their small homeschool co-op or microschool that might have 10 or 15 students. What's worked? What are your best hacks for that problem?
Yeah. Well, first I want to acknowledge what you're essentially saying is customer acquisition or distribution. Like, how do you find people to use what you've built? As a human being and an entrepreneur, whether it's a for-profit, a nonprofit, whether you're a consultant, arguably the hardest thing to do as a founder is getting a lot of people to use your product. Can you build something that 1 or 2 or 3 people really want? Like, can you build a school that a few people want? But then it's like, if you actually do that, it's like, okay, well, how do I go from 2 to 10 or 10 to 20 or 20 to 1,000 or 1,000 to 10,000, depending on what, your personal beliefs are. So it's really hard. So I acknowledge and agree that 50% is accurate. There's the other big one that I've heard is cash flow, and that they're starting from scratch. They have to buy space for a school, and Vela helps a lot with that. And so to your question of what works, honestly, I get asked this question a lot, and you might not like the answer, but in the beginning, it's just hand-to-hand combat. And what I mean by that, obviously metaphorically, is in your phone book, like literally in your phone book, or in your LinkedIn network or your Facebook or the school that you taught at, I guarantee you there's your first 1 to 5 customers that exist somewhere in that graph. The graph is
right. Yeah.
Say like your relationships. Like, I know Manisha knows X person, and like my mom is best friends with this person. They exist. You look in your network and you just start talking to them. And it's important to do it from a place of seeking to understand. And I can give an example. Say that I've taught, I'm from Chicago and CPS for 10 years, Chicago Public Schools, and I'm ready to start my own micro school. I'm a really good teacher pedagogically. I know what I want to educate and teach on, but I'm not a business person. Like, I don't know how to do accounting. I don't know how to acquire customers. What would I do? The first thing I'll do is go in my network and everyone who I'm friends with, or their mother or their uncle or aunt or uncle, and say, hey, I've taught for 10 years. I'm thinking about starting this thing called a micro school. Here's what it is. Happen to have children, and if they do, of course, say, I want to ask you a few questions. Go buy them coffee and seek to understand. And you usually want to develop a hypothesis to try to understand if you're building something that they want. Like, do they care about individualized learning? Do they care to have their kids physically in a space? Do they care about having a forest school? And I would go do that with like 10, 20, 30 human beings. And you can do it on a call and talk to them and look for trends. And what will happen in that one, you'll learn a ton from your customers. I can almost guarantee you're not talking to enough customers who's ever listening to this. You'll learn a ton. And the second thing you want to look for is eyes bulging out of head trends. So like, if out of the 20 parents that you talk to, 7 of them seem to be saying this exact same thing. My kid has ADD. They hate school. I know that they're not happy, but like, I just don't know of any other options. It's super frustrating. And frankly, like, I'd be willing to pay for them if I could find it, but I don't know what to do. You're onto something. Once you get your first 5 or 10, and if you want to scale that, then I would still do hand-to-hand combat and go up to them and say, hey, Manisha, I heard, I know that you're loving the school. Well, are you? Yes or no? If you're not, I want to know why, and I want to fix it. And then if you are, it's like, do you know one other human being that's like you or that's interested in this that I could talk to? And they're, yeah, my friend Sally actually is like, great. Can I talk to her? And Manisha's going to say like, yeah, of course, I'll introduce you. Now, tactical learning. I know you would do this, Manisha, but pretending philosophically, that person will always forget to make the introduction.
Right. Yeah.
It's on you, the entrepreneur, to say, like, follow up and say, hey, Manisha, thanks for mentioning Sally. Would you please introduce her to me? And then you need to set a reminder in your email to follow up with her in 3 days. It's not Manisha's job to remember that. She's busy. These people are probably happy to do it if they love what you built because you're educating their children. You just have to do the work to ask them. And so the way that I've spoken to literally thousands of customers is every single, and you know this, I've done it with you. Everyone I talk to, like, do you know one other person who's similar to you that's like is starting a homeschool or private school? Can I talk to them? And I go talk to them, and then I ask them if I could talk to someone else. And part of the reason that they're open to doing it is, I know I'm talking a lot now, but I usually actively listen with 2 years in 1 month. So I listen a lot. And we build a lot of trust because, like, I get to know who they are as people versus just some robotic AI system that does not scale once you have thousands or millions of customers. Then you could build and I could talk about that, like how to scale user acquisition, but I think that's totally out of scope. I think you should just focus on the hand-to-hand combat in the beginning.
For sure. And I think people love to give advice. I mean, I know that I do. If you ask me for advice about anything, I am going to give it, and I'm going to feel good because I feel like I have value. So, and I think that, it's subtle because you really do have to know, you have to be coming from a place of genuine curiosity. And if you're not, you probably shouldn't be building a business in the first place. I'm just going to put that out there because there's nothing people dislike more than kind of a false user interview where you're just doing this because you're going to go back later and try to sell to them. So if you can come from that place of genuine curiosity and learn, even if you started your business already, but you're saying like, oh, why don't I have more listeners on my podcast or whatnot? And you're getting people's advice on how to improve it and integrating that. And then you can say, hey, I used your idea and my Instagram views grew 300%. They're going to feel so happy that they were useful and they're going to remember you. So, I mean, I'm very extroverted. So I know some people listening, they might think, I don't even know 5 people. Like, how am I, and maybe they just decided to not pursue their PhD in physics and they want to start a physics class and they don't know a single parent. But, probably you might know someone who knows someone. So just start with one person and that can help. And then also there's all these like Facebook homeschooling groups, Reddit homeschooling groups. And if you ask their opinion, you should be prepared that not everyone's going to be nice to you. But yeah, you can meet people. And I'm sure, even I'm always happy to introduce people. So if you don't know anyone, you can just write to me and I'll forward your email to Brett and he'll answer.
One, I agree totally on the advice thing. Second thing, you can't see my elbows now, but like they're scarred. They're very scarred, meaning like I've tried a bunch of things and you just get like,
oh yeah,
it's hard to be an entrepreneur and that's just a part of the game. And so if you understand the game, that you just have to take a lot of shots on goal and try a lot of things, it really helps. The other thing that I want to acknowledge is sometimes educators feel bad charging for the value they provide. And
yes.
I think it's important once they find those, so let's say they find 7 parents, they talk to them, they talk to 20 parents and 7 of them want it. What do you do with that? Then you go back to those 7 parents and say, hey, Mrs. Sally, I listened to you and I'm going to do this thing. And here's what I'm thinking about charging for it. What do you think of that? Would you pay for this?
Right.
And you shouldn't feel bad on asking for that. Now, again, like if you want to do a nonprofit, that's fine. Like you could do it that way. But if you decide to be a for-profit corporation, you should not feel bad asking for that because you're providing value. And if you're not making money sustainably, then you're not going to be here in 5 or 10 years. What's worst case that can happen? They say no. And by the way, like if you build something they want, you solved a problem for them. And if you solve a problem for them, the market would say that they would be fine paying money. Now, who knows how much money they would want to pay for that. But I think that's a really important point for this audience to hear.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree 100%. And I don't know if you know this, but I used to be kind of a high-end tutor in New York City on the Upper East Side. So I tutored, among others, the kids of the CEO of one of the world's biggest banks. And he took quite a liking to me. And whenever I asked him for business advice, he would say, just charge more money. And that he just knew that. I mean, he had observed so many companies, and I have really taken that to heart. And the thing is, I mean, you can charge a little and people can pay that, or you can charge a lot. But ultimately, I think it's about creating a budget. Like, what do you need to feel like you're getting paid for the value you're putting in, that you're covering the space, that you're covering all the needs of the students. Make a reasonable budget. Show it to someone who knows about money. Maybe you haven't thought about something. And then when you have that, you think of a reasonable amount of students that you could fit in your school. And then you take into account your mission. If you want to be able to serve families who can't afford that price, you include that in your budget, and it's either covered by other students' tuition or it's covered by the foundation. It's actually quite straightforward. And then you don't have to feel weird about how much you're charging because you know exactly where that money is going. And if you do give people discounts, you have an organized scholarship process. It's just, everything is so clear. And I used to undercharge and give people discounts. And I realized I had this big revelation that I felt like these people were in debt to me. And nobody wanted to feel in debt to me. That wasn't part of the agreement. And so I just started charging, what I felt it was worth. And then everything changed. My relationship with those people changed a lot.
I think that's great. In the beginning, there's a lot of advice that I'm spitting here and sharing. Granted, I've literally done it every part
you
of it.
have so much great advice. Spit away.
But in the beginning, you just want to be a scientist in the sense that you have a hypothesis, you go test it. I think I could charge $200 an hour in New York City for tutoring. I'm just going to try it. And I'll try it with 3. And maybe they'll all say no. It's great. They don't value what I'm doing, or it's too expensive. Try the next. And you just need to rapidly iterate and learn from that. And then maybe you'll eventually hit on something.
Exactly. And it's all about how it evens out. So if you want to build $1 billion startup, you're going to have margins for profits or in that whole equation. If you want to start a lifestyle business, which is in many ways a better route. And what I mean by a lifestyle business is that you're making income for yourself, you're covering your bills, but you're not looking to get a return for investors or grow beyond a certain size necessarily. So if you're doing that, it's going to be a different rate that you charge. And I think you just kind of have to get clear on all those variables in order to make it work. And then it doesn't feel dishonest or weird to charge that amount of money. It's just what you need to make sure everyone can thrive. Yeah, but I agree with the testing. People will say all sorts of things, but ultimately it's when they click the buy button that you actually know that your thesis is correct.
It is a very cool thing when someone pays you the first dollar somehow.
Oh, so good.
Cash or online, they pay you money. It's wow, even if it's $1, you took a step.
You did take a step. It was so good. And I think that one of the things I've learned from you, Brett, is also about making very clear direct requests that people can say yes or no to. When you, for example, are asking someone if they, want to purchase your product or if they would refer a friend, just not beating around the bush, just saying, would you refer me to one person who I can ask about this?
I agree. I have nothing to add to that. I agree.
Yeah. So that's great. So let's jump ahead to the micro school that's been around for 10 or 15 years. And during the pandemic, they had just a huge surge of customers because there was all this need and they expanded. Now the pandemic is over and they find themselves struggling. They've hired all these teachers and it's just not the same market as it was before. And they're kind of in a panic because the school year is starting. I'm talking to people like this right now. The school might be 10 years old. How do you, what do you do in that kind of situation?
I'm curious, are most of them panicking because they spent a bunch of money and they thought they'd have a huge amount of customers and now they don't?
I think it's a combination of, every year there's been a certain number of customers that they're used to and they've kind of grown gradually. And then during the pandemic, they got a lot of customers and maybe hired some more teachers. And then enrollment dropped a lot. Maybe they're not, marketing as hard as they used to. Maybe they did hire more people, but it's just the market has changed.
I don't have any prescriptive tactical advice on what is different for everyone. I will say, though, when times are hard in the market, there's nothing else to do other than look at your books and say, how much cash are we burning? And how fast can we get to break even? We're thinking about this all the time. Literally every day we think about that. I spend X $1,000s a month. And this is the amount we're bringing in, and I'm spending way more than we're bringing in. Well, I might have to cut some teachers. That's hard, and that feels icky. You're probably friends with teachers, but it's either that or death. And I don't mean literal death, but like your organization, your school dies. And so I think there's a bit of like a buckling your chin strap and just kind of getting down to brass tacks and being an entrepreneur, which is really uncomfortable and hard. But that is what has to happen if you want to see your organization thrive, or you change something and find more customers. And you can be honest and say, like, we're almost break even, but to be frank, we're struggling a little bit. I find that being honestly vulnerable builds trust. Like the people are smart. They're going to read the bullshit radar, excuse the French, and say like, we built something that you love. We're not profitable yet, even though I think we could be. Here's exactly where we are to, in order to be profitable, or here's how much money we need to raise in order to achieve our goal. And say, do you know one or two other parents that we could talk to? Because you love what we have. And I would just be honest with them and talk about it. That's what I would do. But then I would also look at my cost structure and say, do we really need this? Like, do we really need these extra one or two teachers? And maybe you don't. And maybe you have to get in the weeds and like go teach again. And even like one of the best schools I know in the country, this woman named Marissa Hess, she runs Urban Cottage in Florida. She runs a really successful I think she calls it a cottage school. And she's teaching. Like, she is also in the weeds, teaching, tutoring. And I think that's great. Like, even for me, I answer support tickets every day. I did it at Remind. We had 30 million users. Obviously, Omela is at a different scale. We have hundreds of customers and we process millions of dollars in transactions. But I'm in the weeds still. And there's a point where you should not be in the weeds because the organization can't scale. But to be frank, most of the schools listening to this have 5, 10, 20. Maybe some of them have 100. Maybe some of them have 300, 400 students. And there's certain points when you need to extract yourself out of the day-to-day operations. But when times get tough, you got to buckle up or shut up. And the other thing is, no one cares. No one else cares about your problem. Your husband or your wife or your partner or your mom might care. And they probably will, but at the end of the day, it's your problem. And you just kind of got to figure out how to solve it. And so I can give you an example. I was really frustrated with the technology provider we're using for one of our customers, and we couldn't meet an expectation for one of our customers. We failed. And I emailed them, I apologize, and I explained what happened. And I said, this is my responsibility. We failed. And I'm sorry that we failed. Here's exactly what we're doing to fix it. I didn't blame anyone else, because even though the technology partner didn't do what they were supposed to do, at the end of the day, they're using Omela and it's my job.
Right. Mm.
You just gotta straight up say it. And I think that builds a lot of trust with people.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that people really appreciate that you're evolving the product along with them. That gives them a big incentive to stay, is that you're actually building something to suit their needs.
Yeah, for sure. And, we can't listen to everyone, but now we have enough customers where we can look for trends. And then there's also there's depth to the problem. So when you're talking to a customer, they're like, yeah, that would really help me. And then you can say but how would it help you? What would you use it for? They're like, oh, I guess that receipt feature would be a nice to have. It's not a must. We are trying, at least Omela, we only have a certain amount of capacity to build things. And so we try to focus on what is the critical problem versus the nice to have. And if we really do that by listening to a lot of customers to focus on the critical problem, in the end, the whole product will be much better.
Absolutely. And that can be tough. I mean, I feel like I always hear these stories from Y Combinator of, our startup wasn't working, and then we sent one survey and we changed it and then it exploded. And I feel like actual user research is a much more complex and long process than that.
It always takes longer. We're doing it now. We keep talking to customers. It's this continual process where it takes time.
Yeah, absolutely. And have you been speaking to the parents as well who are choosing these education alternatives, or do you have a sense of what's driving them to choose microschools?
No, I don't talk to them very often. And I have a very clear reason why. Our customer is the school owner. We help them solve a problem for them. We save them time and save them money. Now, an implication of that is we have to make it incredibly easy for the parent to pay and respond on Omela. And free. We have a free way for parents to pay. The reason I know that is because I talk to so many school leaders. And so for me, the people listening to this, it shouldn't matter what we're doing at Omela. It's just you should think about your business. But in our context, we just really talk to the school leaders a lot and try to solve a problem for them. And inherently, we have to solve a problem for a parent too because of that.
Yeah, I really appreciated early on in my journey that you really pushed me to be specific about who I was serving, because I felt like you can feel kind of overwhelmed by all the need. I want to help all the parents who want to customize their children's education. But by focusing on homeschoolers, I've been able to be a lot more precise in the way I deliver information, and also, a lot more nuanced understanding of what their needs are. And there's so much variation even within people who are homeschooling.
Yeah, in the beginning, especially, like I'd rather be something to someone than something to everyone, because if you're something to someone, then you just solve, even if it's niche, even if it's 5 people. I think Paul Graham, who started Y Combinator, he said this, like if you have 10 people, you'd rather 10 people who love your product than 100 who like it averagely. And
absolutely.
what we've been focusing on is like that 10 and now 20 and 30 and 40 and just try to make them love it. And it's just kind of this like snowball effect that happens.
Yeah. And I mean, one thing that might surprise people about you is that even though you had built this hugely successful company and you weren't, scrounging for food, you didn't really use social media or ads very much in the first 2 years. I mean, you really just had like 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 conversations a day with microschool leaders. And that word of mouth is so incredibly powerful.
It can be daunting too, like to talk to 6 to 10 customers a day for 3 years. And in the first year, not even have a product for them because we're just trying to understand the problem. It can be quite tiring and also sometimes invigorating. And no, I have been yes, I have been very quiet publicly, even recently. Like we don't even talk about what we're doing because we're just like doing, and the same thing when investors ask to speak to me or like private equity shops or venture capitalists. It's like, sorry, no, if you're not a customer or not helping our products somehow get better, I'm not talking to you. And I mean, I say it in a very nice way, but it's like blinders.
Right. You strike me as someone who has extremely strong executive functioning skills in the way that you're able to say, I only want to talk to this type of person. I want to talk to them in this kind of way. And these are the actions I take when I talk to them. And this is who I'm serving. And were you born that way, or did you just kind of evolve to be like that? I feel like I've been training myself to be that way more.
What is the definition of an executive functioning skill? I'm asking because I want to make sure I understand it.
That is a good question. Hopefully the learning specialist watching this will be okay with my answer. But the way I think about executive functioning skills is your own ability to organize yourself. Oh. So for example, you will say, okay, my focus today is going to be on, acquiring 5 new customers, having 3 conversations, and working on my financial model, something like that. And then you do that. Whereas someone who struggles more with executive functioning skills, I mean, a lot of people with ADHD have trouble with this. They might wake up, they don't really know what to do. They might say like, oh, I need to pick up my laundry, but I'm actually going to make a YouTube video instead. So you just seem to be really able to get very clear on what's important and focus on that in an organized way and stick to your plan.
So you might not believe this, but I actually clinically have ADD. I was diagnosed in 5th grade and I'm dyslexic, which means that when I put my credit card in the machine, it's always flipped upon other things. Like growing up in school, I would have my teacher put a piece of paper on top and below every line and it'd go do, 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 because I couldn't focus on more than one thing or else I would get like scatterbrain. People on this call will probably, or on this podcast will probably know this. I don't know if you could lose the dyslexia or you just kind of come into the gifts that you do and don't have. So I love these, quote, disabilities that I was once given. And I do think I have extremely high executive functioning skills due to 2 things. One, time. It's just like I've just been doing this for so long that this is how I work. And tactically what that means is like I have my Apple Note, I have my to-do list on my Apple Note. And every morning there's 3 things that are like, will help push the company forward that I'm trying to get done. And then there's just like a long list of to-dos and tasks that everyone has in their life. Mow the lawn. There's literally a personal to-do list for mow the lawn. And I find for me that if I don't have a list and it is on it and it is prioritized correctly, I get quite frenetic or like stressed. It needs to be on a list. It's just the way that I am. And so I think it's just something that I've developed over time and it's worked really well for me. There's another component to it, which is I've been able to refine what I'm gifted at and weak at over time. And I try to spend my time what I'm gifted at and where I'm really good and offload what I'm not. Just an example, like I think I'm reasonably good at product, but like I'm not great. My brother's great at it. And so he runs the company with me. And so like pretty much everything in product he's doing. And then like I give a bunch of feedback on Slack and talk about it, but like he's able to own that. And I just have an immense amount of trust in him so that I could focus on talking to customers or sales or raising capital, whatever we need to be doing. And that helps a lot.
Wonderful. I do feel like my own weaknesses have made me stronger. When I was in middle school, I had these huge to-do lists that I could never finish. And never did my homework, spaced out all the time. And I think at one point I decided I wanted to be a really good student. And so I developed these skills that were a reaction to my previous manifestation in school. And now I'm quite organized as well. But it's funny how that works. And I think it can also make you a good teacher because you have a lot more empathy for people who might not be able to organize themselves.
Yeah, I totally believe that. As you were speaking, one thing I was thinking about is like it's on one hand, I really like having a to-do list because it keeps me organized. On the other hand, it's almost like it owns me sometimes. I know that's a very weird thing to say, but it kind of owns my life. My life is relatively structured, and it has to be because there's certain things that my companies ask of me and I need to be doing in order for it to achieve the success. And then there's things that I need to do for my health. And then there's also things I need to do for my family. But if I don't, even though it owns me and sometimes I don't like that, this is where I am in my life right now. And it's what I choose. It's how I choose to structure it, given the goals that I have in my life.
Yeah. So there's lots of different ways that you can structure activities, and finding the way that works for you is very helpful. So, okay. So let's dive in a little bit to the fundraising question, because when microschool leaders tell me they need to raise more money, I almost always tell them they need to charge more tuition. And money can feel so compelling. I mean, when I built my first startup, like just getting money from a VC seemed like the most exciting thing that could ever happen to you. And now I feel like, wow, the most exciting thing that could happen to you is not to ever have to take money from a VC in a way. So I'm wondering if you feel similarly when school founders say, oh, fundraising is our biggest problem. How do we raise money? How do you, suss out if you should be raising money for your learning project or getting that money from customers?
That's a good question. How would I suss it out from a customer, you mean?
If you were starting your own micro school, hypothetically.
Yeah. I think first you would have to choose a set of value systems you want and how you want to operate your life. I don't need to be some type of guru wizard by saying that, but I think it's important to acknowledge, and I can give an example. Remind has raised hundreds of millions of dollars. It's a huge venture-backed internet large-scale company. And Omela has raised a little bit, but we didn't even do it for a while. And there's a bunch of reasons why in that, like, we wanted to build this for a long time. We wanted to have a lot of ownership in it. And we wanted to retain a huge amount of the company because we're quite confident in our ability to execute and build something very valuable. And that's a values-driven decision in what we decided to do. I could have went and raised $10 million, but I didn't want to do that. One day we might, when I felt like the core economics of the company is ready and it's ready to scale. But we're at least at that level, we're just not there yet. And so I think the first thing is just sort of setting the value system of what you want. Like, do you want to build a replica of Acton Academy where there's 250 micro schools that are in your network or a franchise of them? Or do you just want to start a local school that makes $25,000 a year and is able to feed you ramen and your kids, and like you could still work part-time doing your other job, and that's okay if that's what you want. And so I think it's being very clear with the expectations of what you want and why, and then deciding what route to get there. One route is raising money. And there's, you like have to be good at it. And I could talk about what it takes to be good at raising capital. Another route is making sure that you're charging for the value that you provide, which always, like, I think is like the most important thing that you should do. And to your point, charging enough money.
You work with a lot of nonprofits, and nonprofits take donations. So what do you think are the best things to take donations for?
And I'm just being vulnerably honest with you. I don't know. And sometimes I have a hard time with the nonprofit structure, and a bunch of them are our customers, right? But the problem is you're always begging for money. It's just hard because with a for-profit, you charge. Let me just clarify. There is a place for nonprofits. So, like, they should exist. A lot of them should exist. Wonderful. But it's fundamentally difficult because you're not charging the customer for something. You're not saying, I want this coffee and I'm going to charge you money for it. You're saying to some rich person or a fund, please, I want to raise, or like online, you want to do it from a crowdfund from a bunch of people, pay money for something because you believe in it, but you have to keep coming back to that watering hole.
I think it's a great answer. I mean, I have my own opinion on the topic, which is that, it's been amazing for us to get this Bella grant, but they're pretty rare. Just, it was so easy to apply, and I happened to be really in the sweet spot in terms of what they were looking to fund. It just happened, but I didn't really apply for any other grants. But I think that some people are under the impression that fundraising is an easy route to money. And it's just as hard, if not harder, than getting customers to pay for your product. And if you're going to go that route, you're going to have to commit to constantly fundraising all the time. That will be your full-time job.
Yeah, I think whether you're for-profit or nonprofit, the important, and I mentioned values before, that's sort of like how you want to run your life and the decisions you want to make. There's another component of asking yourself what the fundamentals are to what I'm doing. I can give an example. A fundamental to starting a for-profit corporation, an internet-backed, like an internet-scaled one, like Omela, is, do the customers love what we build? Does it retain well? Meaning, do they keep coming back? Is it highly engaging? Do we have a healthy margin? Like, are we making a reasonable amount of money on these people? And can we acquire a lot of them? In that order. So we actually didn't go say, how do we go acquire 10,000 microschools? Because in the beginning, we didn't have a product that they wanted. And if we actually had 10,000 of them in the top of my water bottle, all of them would churn, and like we would have wasted our time. We focus on building something highly retentive so that when we fill it up with a water bottle, then they all stay. And so that is a fundamental of a for-profit corporation that I believe in. I'm sure I'm missing some things like great team, great culture, which are inputs to that. But like those fundamentals have to be decided on first to drive how you want to spend your time. And if fundraising is a component of that, then great. Like then maybe you need to raise a lot of money, or maybe you just need to charge more money based on those fundamentals. But you should think about those intentionally first.
Let's talk about the future of education. Turn on Prophet Kopf here. You have worked extensively with public schools and public school teachers. Now you have worked with hundreds of microschool leaders, many of them who are teachers in the public system or private system, left to start their education initiative, probably also after school programs and other unique, innovative homeschool programs. What are you seeing? I mean, it's almost a silly question what the world's going to look like in 10 years, but what are some of your predictions about how the educational landscape is going to change?
I will say one thing based on talking to hundreds of customers at a grassroots, like ground level floor. I do believe that the type of education that a lot of the people on this call are providing, and this is a bucket of like homeschool, hybrid, microschool, individualized self-directed learning, will account for a much larger percentage of kids being educated in the United States. I don't know whether that number is going to go from 3 to 5 or 5 to 15. I have a belief it's going to grow to like 10 to 15%. But I don't know that for sure. But that is like the one thing that I have a strong belief in based on talking to all these customers, based on one, parent demand. And then the second thing is, I do think that there's this, and the folks at Omela, and probably you know way more about this, but all this ESA funding that's coming in at the government level, like that's just a huge cash infusion that's happening. I think it's like 13 or 15 states that have it now. I think that's very real, like at the top-down policy level, that's actually making it available for a lot of kids to go to these types of schools and pay more money than they would in public education.
For sure. I think, people who are leading the school system are seeing that this system is unsustainable and it's breaking. And so these S's are emerging to help parents curate their children's education. And I mean, there's a lot of questions we're going to resolve, but I think it's great. What about your 2-year-old and your 2-month-old? Where are you leaning these days in terms of what you're going to do with them? I mean, their learning has already begun. It doesn't start when they're ready to register for kindergarten.
Well, there's what I know. One thing I know is that we try to be very intentional about how we parent. So my wife works part-time and she's a full-time mom. And I spend as much human time as possible with them, engaging actively, like trying to not be on my phone, like doing things that they want, actively engaging and listening. And I think a lot of it starts at home with parents. At least that's my belief. Like I want to model value systems that I think are important in the world. I would say that we are leaning towards some type of alternative schooling. There are 2 issues though that we're running into. One, they're expensive. Like we live outside of Boulder, Colorado, and like a Waldorf or Montessori, or we don't really have many microschools. And if anyone's listening to this, we would love for you.
Hey, yeah.
Like we're talking like, 10, 20, some of them are $30,000. It's like insane.
It's very expensive.
It's like super expensive. And so that's just a very real thing. Like we have to figure out if we can financially afford that. But I think we're leaning that way at the moment. There's a second issue is just like inventory, literally like the amount of schools in the space that have the types of value systems that we want to educate our children in. And there's not a lot of them, at least where we live. So there's like price and the amount of school.
How would you describe those values as different than what you see in traditional schools?
For us in the beginning, when our kids are younger, we want them to have very, very interactive experiences with the outside world. So like a lot of time outside, a lot of time in the sunshine, a lot of time playing with other kids. We're not as hell-bent on having them doing like science and math and history. Like it should be much more experiential and hands-on. And we're also not, the type of parents. And again, like, it's not to say it's wrong, but like we don't like having our kids in front of the TV or phones and screens a lot. And it's funny because I'm in software and technology, but I think that when they're so young, like we just want them interacting with the real world outside in the sunshine, having experiences, not sitting in a classroom for 5 to 7 hours a day. It's like my 2.5-year-old, I love him. He just has this like crazy testosterone surge, and he just needs to be like outside and playing and like interacting with the world. So that is the way we're leaning right now. Look, with that said, like, look, we're newbies. I'm sure there's a lot of people on this call who are parents that are like 5, 10, 20 years ahead of me. They're like, oh, you're wrong, or maybe you should this way. But that's based on where we're currently at. That's what we're thinking.
Yeah, I mean, every family and every child is so different. It would be absurd for one parent to tell another parent to do something in a certain way. Wonderful. So, as we kind of wrap up here, I'm thinking about the parents and educators who might be excited to start something. And it sounds like your advice, which I share, would be just start talking to one person ask them questions, get information, ask them what they need, or run an existing idea by them. Do you have any favorite questions you like to ask in user interviews?
My model for when I talk to customers is to first build trust, which you give a very short 30-second history. So like, example, this isn't me, but if you were a teacher, like I taught in public education for 10 years. I think I'm really good at this one thing. And I noticed that my kids needed this and they didn't have it. And so I'm thinking about starting this school and I want to get your feedback. Is that okay? And so you immediately give them context and understanding that, and also build credibility that like, hey, you know what you're doing. You've been doing this for 10 years. And then you start asking them questions. So usually my opening one after that, after they say, yes, it's okay, is like, so how do you educate your kids? Like, do they go to public school? Do they go to private school? And you ask a little bit more open-ended questions. And then as the conversation goes on, you get a little bit more specific and narrow. So an example of that, if they say like, well, I send them to public school, but I have after-school program that I pay like $3,000 a year for. And the kids seem to really love that. And then ding, 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 my brain would be like, oh, interesting. Why do they love it? And the parent will say like, well, they get to be outside in the sunshine and they have all their best friends and they just have so many willies from being in school all day. And then I would just keep digging on that and asking that question. It's almost like when I explained it to my 72-year-old mom, who I love, and she's not very technical. It's like, your job is, you're a mouse and there's cheese and there's a big maze. Your job is to shrink the maze and help that mouse find the cheese by asking a bunch of questions, which start kind of wide and vague and get very specific and narrow with trends.
And what's the cheese?
The cheese is eyes bulging out of head. Oh my God, I want that, Dad. Them replacing services they're using or giving you money. That is the cheese. And multiple people doing it. Them saying, oh my God, Manisha, you have cheddar cheese. No, I'm kidding, not cheddar cheese. But like, you're starting that? Like, I'll rip my kid out of school right now. I'll give you one example, literal example. There's a product that we're thinking about developing with Omela that I had a hypothesis because I talked to so many customers that would solve a problem. I called up 3 of our customers and I said, hey, this is what we're thinking. Just curious, love it, hate it. What's your feedback? And they asked a few questions and they said, I want this now. Like literally, I want it now. I need the product now. Rip it out of our hands. And I'm like, oh my gosh, is that validating? And then I'm just going to go validate it with like 5, 10 more. If all of them say, I need this thing now, no, there's of course still a chance they don't use it, but it gets us closer to truth. It's very validating. And I think that people say more with their emotions and how they speak and their eyes and like versus what they're verbally saying out of their mouth. And I think that's important to monitor.
Absolutely. I love it. Okay. So ultimately, my life and this podcast and my company is about a passion for learning, because I think that learning and growth is really the most wonderful thing that a person can experience, and connection. So what's something you're learning or you've learned, ideally totally unrelated to what we've been talking about, and the more weird and esoteric, the better. But
about anything?
Yeah, anything.
Oh, I can give you two. I'm learning a lot about physical health as it comes to exercising and food for me specifically, and what actually is healthy. I found out like 3-4 years ago, I was pre-diabetic. I know you can't really see my full structure, but I'm a relatively healthy, active 35, 36-year-old male. And I was like pre-diabetic. Like, how did that happen? And I thought I knew what was happening. It wasn't. And I went very deep into trying to understand that. So I'm learning a lot about that, and I'm applying it, and it's working. And it feels good that it's working because I want to be here for my kids when I'm 90. And I way. The other thing I'm learning a huge amount about is just what's called Fintech, which is financial technology infrastructure. Omela makes it easy to collect, payments, forms, signatures, and eventually there's a world where we'll offer a bunch more services, like banking services. And I'm learning about all the layers of think of it as like a cake. This is the frosting up top on when a customer makes a payment. There's all this stuff that happens underneath from a security, compliance, technology standpoint to make sure these customers can do that. And I'm learning a huge amount about the ecosystem, and I've gotten quite advanced by it because it's evolving very quickly. Like the space is evolving very fast, and we've been doing it for like 4 or 5 years now. So like we have a reasonable amount of experience, but obviously still a lot to go. So those are the two things that I'm learning outside of just day-to-day Omela stuff.
I love it. And in terms of, the pre-diabetic learning, is it anything, I know it's very specific to your own body, but are there any books or tips that you would want to share?
So the fastest way to consume a lot of knowledge about it from high quality people, there's a site called Podclips, Podclips. And it basically concatenates people talking who are experts about health, who are good experts like Peter Attia or I think her name is Dr. Patrick, or the Huberman podcast. And they like succinctly explain these nuggets of information in 30, 50 seconds, and you get a lot of it. And so it's like finding the right people to listen to. That service is great. Dr. Attia, actually, I listened to a bunch of his podcasts talking about everything from like using saunas to fasting to lifting weights, and how good that is for you for like bone density and strength. There are those types of people that I listen to and read about more than I do even when I go to the doctor, because the typical doctor, they only have like four days in their entire medical training of nutrition training. 4 days.
Insane.
And so like when they say at the base of the food pyramid, you should be having a lot of bread and carbs. Personally, for me, like I find that to be a load of CRAP. I don't believe it. Now, people on this call may say,
what
like,
does that spell?
Yeah. Well, I don't know. People might say like they love carbs and it's fine. And for me, like I've made the decision. I still eat bread, by the way. I love bread, but like I'm just minimizing it based on all this research. So Podclips, Peter Attia is really great. And a few of those people I mentioned.
Wonderful. That's such a great answer, Brett. So is Omela best for people who are already running a microschool, or for example, in a parent in your situation who maybe doesn't have a microschool in their area and wants to put a group together and start one? Could they use Omela? What's the best time to start, and how do people get involved?
We have both. We have customers that don't have a single customer and are starting in a month from now, and they're collecting their first $1,000. We also have customers that will collect $500,000 to $2 million a year that are at scale. And we love both, and we can support both very well. So email me, brett@omela.com, BRETT@omela.com. Happy to talk to you if we can help.
Amazing. Yeah. So basically, you can experience one of these amazing user interviews yourself, perhaps still going on, not forever. Yeah. So, Remind is just such a beautifully designed product. Apparently we learned that's because of your brother, not you today. And Omela is, I've tried to build a payments platform for microschools, but what Brett has done is just so easy to use and simple. And I've referred a lot of people to him, and I'm really excited about what you're building and how it can support families and teachers. So definitely, if you're interested in getting all the ops out of the way, Omela is a superb place to start. And hopefully you will check it out. We'll have the link in the show notes. So anyway, Brett, it's just always such a treat talking to you. You have helped me so much as an entrepreneur, and you just have such a warm, bright, happy light to you. I always feel energized after we talk. So thanks so much for taking the time to be here today.